Hello everyone, you can see that in our previous video we created and we set up our basic server where we created this endpoint that sends requests to um, our browser, and then we're able to display the request. When we made a request, we're able to display the response when we made a request in our browser. So and everything was working perfectly fine. So over here now in this second video, if you have not watched the first one, go and watch and see how we set up this basic server, how we exported the data and sent it through this endpoint to whichever the client side that might call this endpoint. So we are going to go ahead and see how we can be able to connect our client side application with our server side so that we can be able to consume this post in our client application. So let's navigate to client directory. So in our client directory over here, first of all, let me go to the package.json file. So in our package.json file, I installed two more components added to two more dependencies added to our previous dependencies, which is default React dependencies. I've installed an Axios, I've installed an ndb-react UI kit. So if you have not installed these, go ahead and install them in your application. So this Axios is, we are going to use this Axios for making HRs requests, and we are going to use ndb react UI kit for styling or for importing our components to be used in our own application. So basically, NDB React UI case provides a different sets of components that you can easily call in your React.js application, and make and then it saves you time to actually hand code your CSS styles from the scratch. So it makes use of Bootstrap behind the scene, but everything, if you're familiar with Bootstrap, you can as well use this and NDB React UI kit. So these are the changes that we have made in our package.json. So let's go to our source directory. So in our source directory over here, we created three more directories. Inside, we created component, config, and libs. So and let's see in this our config file. Let's see what is inside. Here in our config file, we import Axios from Axios, which is the library we have installed. We created a variable known as its localhost to detect if application is running locally or in production. And then we have done this and added this to check. So this will return either true or false if application is on localhost. So and then we also created another variable known as its localhost. This localhost, known as API URL. So this API URL will return us the URL of our application, whether our application is running in local host or is running on a remote server. So this is local host will help us to determine, this particular variable will help us to determine if our application is running locally or is running remotely. So we say if it is running remotely, we have to go ahead and provide the URL of where our server is is hosted locally, and if it is running remotely, we also have to provide the URL where our server is hosted at. So and I have appended this slash API because at the end of the day we are going to be making to set up my Axios so that we can be able to configure these our Axios and provide a base URL so that whenever we're making requests, we just go ahead and call the name of that endpoint that we're making requests to. So over here, you can see in our Axios, in order to configure your Axios to make it work the way you want, we call this Axios that we have imported at the top. You can see we have imported at that line number one, we imported at the top. We say dot create, and then we pass in two configuration keys over here, one with credentials and one base URL. This with credentials will allow us to share cookies, will allow our client application to share cookies with the server side or with our server. And this base URL is from this and is this API URL. So it will, at the end of the day, it will bring us either this one if we are running locally or this one if we are running remotely. So this is basically the configuration that we have done in our Axios. So the next file over here, let's in our libs over here, what we have done is we imported this Axios, the one that we have, the configuration we have done over there. We imported it, not Axios from Axios, but the one that we have manually configured it to work the way we want. This one with capital A, and it's a named export. So we imported it first, and then we went ahead. Since the request that we're making to the server will be is asynchronous, we decided to create an async function and then wrap it in a try and catch block. So we call this axios.getPost. So at the end of the day, you can see that in our configuration over there in that config, we already provided the base URL, and we say our base URL. At the end of the day, we ended it with slash API. So at the end of the day, I'm going to have something of we have saved our time from typing this long URL always. So that is what basically this one is doing over here slash get post. So when the response is returned, we decided to return an object, one data with a key of data and error. So this data we hold the data that is returned from the server, and this error we hold the error. We want to check if there was an error. So here we know that any request that falls in this try is request of 200 and HTTP status code 200 or 200. It can either be 201, 246, 200. So anyone that falls within this try catch, we know that it's not an error, it's a successful request. So we decide to set the error to false. Inside our component, we have we created three components, all post, navbar and postcard. So let's go ahead and see what is in navbar. So in our navbar over here, we imported React, we imported an NDB. From this NDB React UI kit, I told it has provided a component for us to use. So we just basically set up a navbar over here, so you can go ahead and then check out. If you want to know more, just visit their documentation, NDB React UI kit, and you will find out we just created the basic navbar over here and call the name of our app. So the next one is in this post. In our all post again, we imported React, and we imported two new things over here. These two functions are known as hooks. They are known as React hooks. So we have different kinds of hooks that we can be able to make use of in our React.js application. So if you want to make a side effect, if you want to make a request to the server, we have to make use of this hook known as use effect. And if you want to maintain a state within our application, we have to make use of use state. So you can see we imported the two. The next one, we imported some component from NDB React UI kit. Then we imported the get post from libs. So if you check our libs over, we created a function known as get post, and we imported a postcard. We'll be explaining that next. So and we created three state over here. Post is error, loading. So the loading we want to use to detect if our component is making request to the API, and error if error must have returned, and post if the post if data is returned, we will get it, set it to this post. So and with their respective functions to set them up. So now, in order to make a side effect or to make request to our API, we need to call this use effect function. So within the body of this use effect, within this use effect, we have to create a function known as fetch data. Since our get post over here is an async function, we have to wrap it inside async and await, so that it will now fetch our result and return. So we created this async function, and then we called this function here. This is a function that we created in this and exported it. So and then we imported it in this component and we called it. So it's either going to return an object as a response of data or error. And you can see over here we say it should return data or error even under this one. So now we will set its error. So its error can be true or false. We set it, and set post is the data that will be returned. And if our component is loading, we want to return after it was, you can see that by default we set loading to true, so that when we load this application, our application will show the state of loading. Then when data is fetched and returned, we set loading to false. So and then after that we call this function below it. Immediately after we created the function, we called it below it so that it can execute when this component is loaded. So and then in the body of our main component, we say if it is loading, it should display a loading spinner. So this loading spinner is exported from ndb dash real UI key. You can take a look at it over here. So and then we say if it is not loading and is error. If loading is false, that is our request must have finished processing. If it is false and there is an error, then it should display that sorry, an error occurred. Else, if there is no error and it is no longer loading, we now remember over here we said if our response is returned, we use this function that is exported from useState. We export the variable and the function to set the variable. So when we set this post here to response on data, whichever data is returned, we know that if it is empty array or if it is an array populated with post, it will set it here accordingly based on what we have defined over here. So our data can either be empty array if there is an error, or it can have the post that we made the request to the server. So now we now look through it, we now map through it and then display. We want our result to be in grid like format. So we call ndb raw and then we map through our post and then we call ndb column so that it can maybe have one column, two column, three column. So once we specify that, we specify over this lg property is used to specify how many columns you want to return. What will be this? Yes, how many columns you want to return per what will be the size of the column that you are returning over here in this particular one. So when you specify lg4, it will take 4 columns. So you know that we have up to 12 grid lines, so it will return 4 out of 12. So if you are having 4 that will be like 3 per row. So and then we call postcard and then we pass it a prop of post, the post that we are mapping through. So react.js makes it useful that you can be able to divide your app into separate and components. So we created, instead of having all our posts displayed in this all post component, decided to create a single postcard that will be having each post. So let's check out our postcard and see what is inside. So in our postcard, we went ahead and required imported in React, and we imported some components from ndb react UI kit. And then inside our card, ndb react card, we decided to make it h100 so that all our card will have the same height, and we say width should be 100%. It should cover the full grid line. And over here we said src, we say the source of the image. You know that from our server, when we are sending our data from the server, our data has id, has title, has content, has photo url. So we assume that that is the structure of our post. So we say post.photo url, and we set another property top, position top. So this will display our image at the top, and this alternate. So let's go ahead and edit this our alternate. If there is more, the image is not found, this alternate tag, this one is basic html, it will display this. So we say post dot title, let's display the title there. So now another one, we created ndb card body inside our ndb card, and we called ndb card title. All these are imported from ndb real UI kit, and we call here, we say the post dot title should be inside this ndb card title. The next one is ndb card text. Then we say the content should display inside, and then we provided a button. This button is not going to lead us anywhere, but we just want to provide a button to show like we are going to actually click, and this button will take us somewhere, but it's not going to take us anywhere. That's the reason why I just provided a hash over here. So this is basically what we have done. So once we have created all this, how can we now go ahead and display all the posts in our application? So now in order to display this, we decided to call our all posts in app.js. So in order to make use of ndb react, we must first of all import this css file from ndb react UI kit, or else our component will not work. So ndb react UI kit provides this, and ndb, if you have installed the package, you can go ahead and import ndb-react-ui kit slash this slash css slash ndb dot min dot and css. This is the minified version of their css. So with this now, it will go ahead anytime that we call any of these component, ndb card, ndb this, it will just go ahead and style the component. It has already pre-styled the component for us, so we can just, if we need card, we just call ndb card and it will give us a card like structure. So and then we called our navbar. So you can see over here in our component have navbar. We imported our navbar over here, and again we imported our all post. So another file over here is app.css. In this app.css, there is nothing special inside. It's just one particular property of .app disalign center, so that all our component will disalign center. So now we call navbar and then we call the post so that it can display in our application. So immediately our application loads, this all post component from over here will be called. So once this all post is called, this function that we created over here to fetch data from the server will be fired. So once this function is fired, all these conditions that we have defined over here will be shown in our browser. So we are going to go ahead and take a look at how these components that we have put together will be shown in our browser. Alright, so back here in our browser, since our server is running on port 3000, go ahead and type localhost colon 3000 and hit enter. Well, you can see that our post is displaying over here in the browser. This is being fetched from the server, but we have one issue: our loading spinner is not showing. So let's see how we can fix that. Alright, so back here in our all post, if you come to this all post, we say if it is loading, and then we display this div without returning. So all we need to do is to return so that this page will not proceed to process other requests. So just cut it and put it inside and put return keyword. So return, and then we can put a bracket. So this we check to see if our page is still, if our request is still loading, and then display the loading speed accordingly. So let's go ahead and check it out in the browser and see. Great. So if you save the file back here in our browser, let's refresh the page and see if our loading spinner will show. So you may notice that when our app is making requests, you can see the loading spinner here until when there is a response that has returned. That is when the loading spinner will go away. So you can see when the response is returned or result is returned, the loading spinner has gone away. And you can see our beautiful looking block. Now we have successfully created um, a node.js express server that exposes an endpoint where we are consuming the endpoint in our react.js application. So and if we go ahead and maybe try to inspect this page, because in that our request we had console.log and the response, we can be able to see our result that is returned from the server in our console. Alright, so if you inspect your code over here in the browser and you want to see the response that's returned from the server, just go ahead and click on this console tab. So once you switch over to console tab, you can see the response that is our response is returned and stored in data. If we click on expanding this data, you can see all our 12 posts. It is showing an array with 12 posts that is returned from the server. So you can see this is the post that we are displaying over here. And if you click on this config to see the request, you can see that it may request to see our base URL that we specify, API, and the method is get and the URL is post. So this will take this and append it, so it will become http colon localhost 5000 / API / post. So you can see it over here, it has returned successfully. So let's close this. So basically, this is how you can be able to create an API and create your own React.js application and consume your own an API endpoint in your own React.js application. So the next step for us now is to carry our client-side application and our server-side and API and host it on cpanel. So let's see in the next video. Thank you.